The science of murder, the analysis of dangerous new psychedelic drugs, and the fingerprints and trace evidence left behind by suspects at crime scenes are just some of the topics that I'm going to be discussing with a panel of forensic science investigators later this month. And you can come along for free. A special public event to celebrate 50 years of Forensic Science Ireland is going to take place at the National Convention Centre in Dublin on May 28th. The doors are at 6 p.m. and tickets are available now on eventbrite.com. Don't miss it. So we're back to the Richard Satchwell trial. He's standing trial for the murder of his wife, Tina Satchwell. The state say that he killed her and basically hid her body under the stairs in their home in Youghal in Cork for nearly over 6 years before he was arrested and her body was found. Today, there is some evidence around. There's a good few witnesses actually today, but before we come on to that, there seems to be a good bit of cross-examination from Grehan, Senior Counsel, who's representing Satchwell, and he seems to be digging into the time that Satchwell is actually arrested, which happens in 2023. But before we get to that, and before we get to the witnesses today, why don't we have a quick recap about that timeline and what happened?
So the state are saying that he murdered his wife Tina on March the 20th, and that's when they figure she died, maybe
2017.
2017.
Yeah.
And then on the 24th of March 2017 is when he walks into Fermoy Garda Station and expresses concern. And then it's in May that year, before an official missing persons report is done after a welfare check to him, and they upgrade it. And then in June of that year, we heard from a Garda sergeant at the time, felt that, it was a corporate decision was taken, that there may have been a criminal element involved. And they got a search warrant on the basis of suspected assault causing harm, and carried out a search of the house. And they took certain items, which were documents, Western Union financial documents. They also took 2 laptops. He handed over, I think it was her phone that she had left behind, according to Richard. And they also... They carried out a luminol search, or a Blue Star, as the product was called, which is to look for any traces of blood, and they found nothing. And so then what happens in the subsequent years after that is Richard engages with the media, who are kind of curious about this woman who's gone missing. He does a number of interviews, mostly broadcast. He does some print. We know since, like in some of the interviews that he did then with Gardaí, he did one, this enhanced cognitive interview, or an advanced witness statement in 2021 with Detective Sergeant Dave Noonan. And in that he actually complains a little bit about the press and, how sometimes these words are twisted. But he again repeats the story that, that she had asked him to go to Aldi to get some bits and pieces and food for Pearl the parrot. He left her that morning at 10:30, or before that, sorry. To wind back even to the very beginning, he said he was up early that morning. He was out in the back fixing up a washing machine. The dogs came out of the house, so he knew then that she was up, and he got some tea and toast and brought it into her into the kind of the living room area. That she asked him then to go to Aldi, which he did, and when he came home from that journey, she wasn't in the house. Keys were on the floor. Phone was on the table, and he then really was kind of not sure what to do. He kind of left things, and then 4 days later went into Fermoy Garda Station, and then did the various Garda interviews, and then
claims as well that she's gone missing with a suitcase of cash.
So we're kind of learning this. We're learning this slowly. So even like the week after she went missing with this cash, she's telling some people at car boot sales, and one of these we heard from today, John Grehan, that she'd left him with after taking this money, they'd saved up €25,000, and that she was capable of violence and had slapped him on just the previous Sunday, he tells them, and that also on one occasion, but didn't specify when, that she had knocked 2 teeth out of him as well. And John Grehan was asked about this. So we'll hear a bit of that. And So there was this. There was other witnesses we've already heard before where he had said, and he said it in some of the Garda interviews that he'd done, including this one in 2021 with Detective Sergeant Noonan, about like it got worse since her brother died by suicide in 2012. They were no longer in a sexual relationship, but he was obsessed with her, is the way he put it. He said that he continued to be devoted to her and all the rest of it, and that her moods would become worse, and she could fly off the handle and suddenly subject him to various different attacks. And he didn't necessarily want this to get out there, and he didn't actually say this in the media interviews, but again, some of these interviews then that he gave would come back to haunt him later, as we found out, because when the investigation was 4.5 years down the road, and a new detective inspector took over, Anne-Marie Toomey, and she and David Kelleher took over, or not took over, but reviewed the information that they had in the incident room. Detective Kelleher was now the incident room coordinator. So they reviewed everything, and she said in her evidence already in the trial that it was very much formed the opinion that she had died an unlawful death. And so that brings up to kind of January 2022. By August 2022, the DI feels that there was enough evidence, or there was a reasonable grounds rather, to arrest Richard Satchwell for murder at that point. And that by the following year, in September 22 rather, she came to the view then that she had never left the house, and had also engaged the services of a forensic archaeologist who also gave evidence about domestic murders, and where a victim of a domestic murder would likely to be in such a case, that there was absolutely
that was really interesting evidence, wasn't it?
And there was absolutely no trace of it. So the guards had actively been looking at this, and they talk about all the different things they went through, 65 possible sightings that were all checked out, including ones abroad. Her DNA profile being uploaded to an Interpol database. They spoke to every taxi driver and bus company looking for CCTV.
When was the last sighting of her?
The last sighting of her in public would have been the car boot sale in Rathcormac on March the 19th.
Okay.
And
they'd never captured her on CCTV after that, or anywhere like that?
No, there was nothing there was no CCTV that could back up his statement that she took 2 suitcases and that she had left town.
Yes.
And there was no sign of any evidence that she had left town.
Right, okay.
So that brings us up then to October the 10th, when they do this invasive search, and they go in with the archaeologists and the Kango hammer with the builders, and Fern the cadaver dog, and they've everything indicates this place under the stairs. The concrete looks different. The dog is reacting to it, and it sounds hollow when it's first hit with a power tool. And they do a little bit of digging. They see a finger, and they stop the dig at that stage. Already, I should have said earlier that day, or already, Richard had been arrested on suspicion of murder, but there was no remains found at that stage. And then when he realizes, or he's rearrested the following day, or he's rearrested on the day they actually take her out of this clandestine grave, as it was termed, and they're putting it to him, and he changes his story. And we heard some of that kind of challenging interview that he had again with Detective Sergeant Noonan. And he talks about, suddenly she flew at him. There was this struggle. He tried to hold her back with the dressing gown belt. It was close to her throat. He didn't think it was around her when she died. He can't really explain that. It was all a blur. And then he talked about, he was trying to put her arm around him as he sat on the floor. He was face wet with tears. He uses a nail scissors to kind of cut the belt because it's stopping him from getting her hand around him. And that these following days are a blur, but he admits that he put her into an unplugged chest freezer for a couple of days, and then dug the grave and wrapped her in plastic and placed her in that.
It's really interesting, to consider that sometimes it's what isn't there ends up being evidential value, doesn't it? Rather than actually tracing her on the CCTV, what the Gardaí have basically told the court and the jury was the fact that they didn't see what Satchwell had said that's when the sort of the focus of the investigation goes on the fact that she never left that house.
Well, the lack of evidence could be evidence as well.
Yeah,
Someone
exactly.
says somebody, left
Did
the country
this
and they
and
go through every possible way of leaving the country and can't find it.
yeah,
There's no evidence she left the country.
yeah,
I mean, that's evidence in itself.
yeah. So today, so that brings us totally up to date on what happened. He was arrested and clearly charged then
Sure, I left a few bits out. It's been fairly complex.
It's
now
been
that we
fairly
are into,
long, but
we're into week 4.
he's charged ultimately with murders before the courts, and this is where he is now in the dock of the Central Criminal Court. So today, your witnesses, hard to count because they can jump from them, but you think the prosecution case is coming towards an end? You're on to you've had a lot of witnesses.
Well, there was 7 today, but now at least, one of those, Dave Kelleher, he's the incident room coordinator. He was called back again.
Yeah.
So I think this is his 4th or 5th time on the stand,
Okay.
because he was the person they were using as the witness to present all the video evidence, even though he wasn't the guard doing the interviewing.
Yeah.
But he did the arrest and caution. So we heard from him today on the actual, Friday the 13th, when Richard Satchwell was effectively, he was released from custody from his cell, and then he rearrested him outside his cell. So he didn't rearrest him. Sorry, it was a new arrest. And he went back to his cell for something to eat, and then it was about 50 minutes later. This is just after 8 o'clock on Friday the 13th. The word has come. They basically he reads out the charge of contrary to common law. You did murder Tina Satchwell on the various at the date in Grattan Street, and he basically he was cautioned, and then in reply, according to Dave Kelleher, he said guilty or not guilty, guilty, and that was his reply.
Right.
To at the moment he was
guilty
arrested.
or not guilty, or just guilty, not guilty, guilty.
Well, the way David Kelleher said it today was guilty or not guilty, guilty. So guilty or not guilty, guilty.
Yeah. Okay.
So, sorry, I fluffed that line a bit.
Yeah. No. That's okay. So it's kind of a statement, nearly.
Yeah, and so there was some cross examination over that. Detective Kelleher was asked then about, was it explained to Richard Satchwell that there are different types of homicides, that it's not necessarily, murder isn't always kind of that the homicide in question. And he was saying, look, no, that wasn't explained to him. And he said, did any other guard explain that to him? He says, I can't recall.
And just explain that homicide can be manslaughter or murder.
Yeah, I mean, there's other, murder is, it's the intention to take a life, and manslaughter is, causing someone to die, but there was no intention to cause them to die.
So homicide covers a homicide investigation covers both those things.
Yeah.
That's what the word was used in the case.
Yeah, and it was actually explained as well in the opening statements of the Satchwell trial as well, about murder, and that it's an unlawful homicide in the sense that there is lawful homicide, in that if you have, I don't know, an armed Garda or a soldier who shoots someone in the course of their duties and kills them, it's a lawful homicide. And so this was kind of, they were going through his detention as well. So I mean, just to go back to the moment he charged, and then he was, Brendan Grehan was asking him, he was asking about was his lawyer present at the time, and he said he wasn't present and that he didn't contact him. And he was asked, the guard was asked, did he know that members of the press had been tipped off that Satchwell had been charged? And he says, at the time I wasn't aware of that. And then he asked him about bringing him to court the next day, and he was saying, he was asked, did you handcuff him? Now, he was already asked, did he handcuff him when he arrested him within the Garda station? And he said, no, he didn't, because he didn't feel it was necessary. But on this occasion, the next day, when they bring him to Cashel court, he said he did, because they were outside the Garda station. And he was asked then, do you know what a perp walk is? And he goes, no, I don't. And it's kind of explained that this is kind of the idea of people being paraded before the press to be photographed. And he said that wasn't the case. He was asked how many Gardaí were there to bring Richard Satchwell to Cashel District Court, and he was myself, the driver, 2 other Gardaí. There was a second patrol car, and he was asked, have you ever charged someone murder before? And he said no, he hadn't. And he said, do you remember where the car was stopped? And Brendan Grehan was making the point that He said, you seem to park a long way away from it, or you could have parked closer. And he said he was effectively marched to the court in front of the media. And he said, well, he was brought, and and the media presence was the first he knew of it was when he saw it. And now that I know what the terminology means, i.e. perp walk, he said, no, it wasn't. And he was asked, were the Garda overcompensating for their failure, as Brendan Grehan put it, for their search in 2017? And then he rephrased that question, like, as a corporate body, did the Gardaí fail, like, in that search? And he said, look, everything was done when they were involved in the case. Everything was done to the best of his ability, and that his colleagues would have been at the same, would have been doing the best they could have.
And when did he get involved in the case? This was along with Superintendent Toomey.
He was appointed incident room coordinator in August 2021 when D.I. Toomey
so he's answering these questions in regards to when he was involved in the case. Yeah.
And so there was. So that the trial today kind of finishes with the cross-examination of Dave Kelleher. So, but I think he's still on the stand. Brendan Grehan said he had more questions for him, but it was gone past the time. But like earlier on when he was cross-examined, like, after, say, when he was asking what were other types of homicide were explained to him, he also mentioned that throughout his second detention, i.e. after the body had been found, he was kind of led through this. He said Richard Satchwell had admitted that he'd lied. Yes, that's correct. He gave an account to you. She died in the course of a struggle. That's right. And he never deviated from that position. And that's correct as well. And he also asked him, like, while there was a forensic archaeologist engaged, was there any expert engaged that, to help with trying to explain Richard Satchwell's explanation of the struggle in which Tina Satchwell died in? And they said, no, there wasn't anyone brought in, but that Margaret Bolster would have done the post-mortem, and she's yet to give evidence. So apparently we'll be hearing from her at some point.
Okay. There was a doctor in the stand?
Yeah, there was, again, there was this thing about the medical records, because we know this is from, in one of the Garda interviews, like, he talked about how he had suffered facial injuries and scratches, and that he'd been treated by a doctor for it, and that one of them, he went. It was this doctor called Deirdre O'Grady in Fermoy, which Richard Satchwell had said that that doctor was the one that Tina had called one time when he'd taken an overdose in 1995. So she was called to the stand and basically said that she only just recently retired, but she had been in Fermoy for most of her career. She ran the Family First medical practice, and the answer was that no, she had never treated Richard Satchwell. She had no records. It would have been in the 1990s. She had paper records then. She still has them all, she says.
Right.
They computerized in 2001. And then she did say that Tina Satchwell did attend briefly. I furnished all the medical records that she had to the investigators, and she remembers Richard attending with her, but she had never treated him. And she said, and about when she was asked about the overdose by Brendan Grehan, she said, I've no recollection of that. I would have notes if something that serious, was brought to my attention, that she would have that. And she had no records or any recollection of him saying that he had these scratches to his face as well, caused by Tina Satchwell. She said, I kept excellent medical records as a general practitioner. She still has them all.
And didn't we hear evidence previous to this that they always attended a doctor together?
Yes. And again, she talked about, she
remembers
she was treating
both.
Tina Satchwell. She remembers him being with her. So she's actually going to be recalled. They want her to go and look for they wanted to search her medical notes for any treatment that she did for Tina Satchwell.
The prosecution or the defence too?
Well, it was agreed in court. It was Brendan Grehan very much. I think he mentioned in court, they said, I thought we were going to have these or whatever. And so the judge more or less said, look, well, we need to go from the 1990s up to the point where you computerize, because we just need to look at the paper records and see. So she's going to be required to come back. And there was a data protection, regional data protection manager, Rosaline Smith Lynch from the HSE, and she was asked just to give evidence about the medical cards. And basically the record that they had was that they were both eligible. One of Tina from 2002 and Richard from 2003. And there was no real other evidence on that. There was a little bit of cross-examination, I think, which Brendan Grehan was asking, like, were the records complete? And again, she was talking about there was it turns out that they might not be complete, that there was a transfer of files in 2011, and it may be possible that previously all this information was kept on paper at a local level. So that was where they went with that particular one. And we heard then again from one of the car boot people. These are friends that the Satchwells, people that they knew from the car boot sale. So there was John Grehan. I suppose there was a little bit of levity in front of the jury today that he appeared to be wearing like kind of earphones when he came to take the stand, but they were actually I think for his hearing aids. And the judge had asked him to take them off, and then it was quite obvious as he was being asked to repeat the oath that he couldn't quite hear. And the judge said, "Have you a hearing problem?" And explained then that the earphones were actually his hearing aid. And the judge said, "Sorry, that was my fault." And there was a bit of laughter in court about that. So he talked about knowing Tina and Richard, that she was a very nice, lovely lady. Like he didn't actually know her from childhood, but he married a woman who was just 3 or 4 down from Tina's like family home, and he would have known her by her maiden name. Like that's how far they went back. And that on March the 19th, 2017, he met Tina and Richard in Carrantoul car boot sale. So this is the day before, this is before the 20th that it's alleged that he killed her. And he was talking to her on that day, and she said she was buying and selling as usual and all the rest. And she was after buying some expensive clothes and some perfume. And he said, "Oh God, you must be going to meet someone tonight. You must be going to meet a fella or a man." And she told him, "I have one man and one man only, and I love him so much." And she'd never do anything to hurt Richard. So this is something that Richard had said, in his interviews with the guards, and I think in the media interviews as well. And the following week, this witness, John Grehan, met him again in Castletown Roach, and he was on his own. He asked him where Tina was, and he explained that she'd left him, that she'd taken this sum of money, the €25,000, and Richard said to him that she was a street angel and a house devil. And he was just, he said, like, when you would meet Tina, like at the car boot sale, she'd have her little dog with her, and she always dressed very well, and she was a cheerful kind of person, the way he put it. Under cross-examination, then they go through it again. He talks about, she had a good eye and an expensive eye for clothes, and she'd wear them for a while and then sell them again. She'd be looking for bargains. And then when he was at these car boot sales, he wasn't a stallholder himself. He was just looking. And Tina would ask him how his wife was, because around this time his own wife was in hospital. And again, he repeats the kind of how he made the I suppose the bit of banter, and that she went and explained how she'd never heard Richard and she'd love him and all the rest. But in the following week, then, when he met Richard on his own in the Castletown Roach car boot sale, now Richard told him about that as well as her leaving him, being a street angel. He said that she was violent towards him and that she had slapped him just the week before. And that on one occasion, not specifically when, but on another occasion, she had knocked 2 teeth out of his head. And he said, so John Grehan, he said in evidence that he said to Richard Satchwell, she wouldn't hurt a child. And he was asked, "Did you say that to Richard?" And he said, "I did." And he was just asked,
wouldn't hurt a child or a fly?
A child, is the way
That's
it was
a weird
said.
phrase,
Yeah.
isn't it? Yeah.
And he was kind of he was asked about like his statement he gave to guards, and he said, "Well, the one I gave to the guards close at the time," he says, "that's the truth." He was trying to be as accurate as he could, and again kind of repeats the story that we know that Richard has also kind of mentioned in some of the media interviews and the guard interviews, that he felt this was kind of Tina's, possibly it was her way of saying, don't come after me, I'm going to be all right. So so we also heard then from Angela Sheehan. So this is the lady that that Richard would have described as Tina's best friend, and she was called to the stand. She said they met in the swimming pool. She used to go swimming nearly every day. She'd go to the gym, and when she'd come out, they would meet. They would talk in the sauna, and that's how she knew her. He says, "We weren't friends. We were acquaintances." She'd sometimes wave at her while she's working at the dogs. She'd asking what she'd talk about fashion, her high heels. She loved her fashion, her high heels, her hair and makeup, and that's what they talked about all the time. She was a lovely girl, pleasant to talk to, bubbly and good for a laugh. She said, "I never met her family. I never knew where she lived. They never exchanged phone numbers. She never saw her again when she moved from Fermoy." And then she remembered one day she was at the Grand Hotel getting a coffee, and Richard Satchwell came up to the window of her car and asked him if she knew where Tina was. And the next thing, there was a journalist came along, and they were going off to have a meeting. And she said then, he never touched me, he never went near me. And
So how did she come up originally, and why is she there? Because did he say something in a statement about her, about Angela?
He would have referred to Angela as her best friend.
In what context? Oh, he was keeping in touch with her or something, or
no. That I think from memory again, it was. I think it was. He was suggesting that Angela would be able to corroborate certain things that he would have said to the guards and to the media, and that Angela would probably know all this because she was Tina's best friend.
right?
And that's,
She's categorically saying,
and she was saying, "No, we're not friends.
No, we're not.
Like, we're just acquaintances."
We
And
didn't
she was
even
a lady she knew from the gym that she'd have a chat to. Yeah,
that she didn't even
that was
have
it.
her number.
No,
Right,
and that when
okay.
she left for Moy, she never saw her again.
Right. Okay. Basically, when prosecution finish with their witnesses, which, you know, you'd imagine should be shortly enough, you've mentioned there in particular Margaret Bolster, who's the pathologist, will have to give evidence along with probably a few others who were there for the dig and the finding of her body, yeah?
Well, it depends. I mean, there is one archaeologist we haven't heard from.
Yeah.
There was two there. We heard from one of them, but
Right.
I don't know if they're going to call them all. We don't have.
But basically,
insight
when
into
we
who's
do
coming.
come to the end of the prosecution witness, it was mentioned at the beginning of the trial there'd be 100 witnesses. Then what happens is the state will rest their case at some point in front of the jury. They'll have called all their witnesses, they'll have given all their evidence. And at that point, we will hear whether or not there will be a defence case. Because the defence can make a case themselves. They can call witnesses. They could call Richard Satchwell to give evidence. And he could then be cross-examined if he
That's a nice word. It's a new one.
cross-examined. Sorry. What is the
know how you
word?
feel.
No, that's one of those.
Cross-examined.
Thank you.
Cross-examinated. I like that. We'll go with that from now on.
He can be cross-examined, right?
Sure, I made up a few
By the prosecution, cross-examined. I knew it just didn't sound right. But anyway, but otherwise the defence don't have to make a case because it is actually up to the state to prove their case.
Yeah.
So, you know, when it comes to the end of the state's case, then we see what happens next, basically. And that will determine how long more the trial goes on. Because if the defence don't make a case, if they stick with the cross-examination they have been doing all the way along. Did I say that word again? No, I said it right. Did I? Sorry, I'll never say it right
I
again.
wasn't listening. I know.
And then as it comes towards the end of a trial, usually the two sides, if there are two sides, or else the prosecution will have to sum up, then a judge usually sums up the case himself to the jury and gives them a bit of advice on
Charge the jury, as it's called, yeah.
what is expected of them. All right. Well, until tomorrow. Thank you, Eamon.
Always a pleasure, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.